My name is Eric Miller, and up until recently, I thought I had life all figured out. At 34, I'd built a career as a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm, owned a modest but comfortable home in Columbus, Ohio, and had a marriage that, by all outward appearances, was rock solid. My wife, Megan, was my world, my partner, my confidant, my best friend. We'd been married for 6 years. I met her at a mutual friend's wedding, where she was the maid of honor, and I was just a guy trying to avoid making a fool of himself during the toast. Megan was magnetic, the kind of woman who could light up a room with her smile. She had a laugh that made you forget your worries, a sharp wit that kept you on your toes, and a kindness that felt rare in today's world. For years, we lived a simple but happy life. Weekend hikes, dinner dates at our favorite Italian restaurant, and Sunday mornings spent reading side by side in our living room. We didn't have kids yet. We were taking our time, enjoying the freedom of being just the two of us. Megan worked as a freelance photographer, often disappearing for hours with her camera to capture moments she said told stories. She had an eye for beauty and a talent for making the ordinary seem extraordinary. Her work wasn't just her job. It was her passion. I admired that about her. But passion, I would soon learn, can be a double-edged sword. Looking back, the signs were there, subtle at first, like whispers you can barely hear over the noise of life. She started spending more time out, claiming she needed inspiration for a new photography project. Her phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter or coffee table, became glued to her side. She'd laugh at messages and quickly swipe them away when I entered the room. I brushed it off, telling myself not to be paranoid. Megan loved me. We were happy. She had her quirks, sure. Who didn't? But in hindsight, those quirks were cracks in the foundation of our marriage. The moment my perfect world started to crumble came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I got home from work early, intending to surprise Megan with dinner. I parked my car in the driveway, juggling a bag of takeout and a bouquet of her favorite lilies. As I reached the front door, I saw her car wasn't there. It wasn't unusual for her to be out during the day, but it was nearly 7 p.m., and she hadn't mentioned any plans. I called her cell, but it went straight to voicemail. That night, I sat alone at the dining table, the food growing cold as doubt began to creep in. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of the end. Megan didn't come home until after 10 p.m. By then, the lilies I'd bought for her were wilting in their vase, and the takeout containers were still untouched on the table. I heard her car pull into the driveway and braced myself, trying to calm the uneasy feeling that had been building for hours. When the door finally opened, Megan stepped in with her camera bag slung over her shoulder. She was flushed, her hair slightly disheveled, and she wore the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey," she said breezily, kicking off her shoes. "You're up late." I forced a smile. "Yeah. I got home early and thought I'd surprise you with dinner." I called, but your phone went straight to voicemail. "Oh, shoot," she said, rummaging through her bag and pulling out her phone. "Battery died. I've been out all day shooting for a new project. You know how I get when I'm in the zone." I nodded, but something about her explanation felt off. Megan loved her photography, but she was meticulous about keeping her gear and her phone charged. "I wish you'd told me," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I would have joined you." Her smile faltered for just a moment, and she shrugged. "It was just boring stuff. Some landscapes, some street shots. Nothing exciting." The words were casual, but the way she avoided my eyes told a different story. We sat down to eat, though the dinner felt more like a formality. Megan asked about my day, nodded in all the right places as I spoke, but her mind seemed elsewhere. She picked at her food, glancing at her phone even though she just said the battery was dead. Later that night, as I lay in bed, Megan fell asleep almost instantly. But I couldn't. I stared at the ceiling, the uneasy feeling from earlier gnawing at me. Her explanation had been plausible enough, but something wasn't sitting right. I thought about the way she'd come home, flushed and glowing, but not with the excitement she usually had after a successful shoot. I thought about how she'd avoided my gaze and how her smile had seemed more like a mask. I told myself I was overthinking it, that I was letting my imagination get the better of me. But deep down, A small voice whispered that I wasn't. And that voice wouldn't go away. The following day, I tried to shake off the unease from the night before. Megan seemed back to her usual self, cheerful, affectionate, and busy editing photos on her laptop. She even joked about my detective look when I caught myself staring at her for too long. I laughed it off, telling myself she was right. I was being paranoid. But then, on Saturday, I found something that reignited the nagging doubts. Megan had gone out for another solo shoot, leaving me with the rare luxury of a quiet house. I decided to tackle the growing stack of laundry, a chore I'd been neglecting. As I sorted through the hamper, I came across her jeans from earlier that week. Reaching into the pocket to check for tissues, I pulled out a crumpled receipt. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it, but this one caught my attention. It was from a bar downtown, a place we'd never been together. I frowned, studying the timestamp, 6:52 p.m. on Tuesday. The same evening Megan had come home late, claiming she'd been out shooting photos. My heart sank. Why would Megan be at a bar when she said she was working on a project? And why hadn't she mentioned it? I stared at the receipt for what felt like forever, my mind racing with questions. The logical side of me tried to come up with innocent explanations. Maybe she'd stopped for a drink to unwind. Maybe she'd met a fellow photographer to discuss ideas. But the small voice in the back of my head whispered something darker. I shoved the receipt into my pocket and spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on anything else. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. When Megan came home later that evening, I tried to act normal. I asked about her shoot, and she told me about some old warehouses she'd found on the outskirts of the city. Her story was detailed, complete with descriptions of the light and angles she'd captured. But something about the way she told it felt rehearsed, like she'd prepared the answers in advance. I didn't mention the receipt. Not yet. Instead, I decided to pay attention, to watch, to listen, and to wait for more pieces of the puzzle to fall into place. Over the next week, I noticed small changes in Megan's behavior. She was out more often, claiming she needed new inspiration for her work. Her phone, once casually left around the house, was now constantly by her side, always face down. She started dressing differently too, nothing too obvious, but enough for me to notice. Normally, she preferred comfortable clothes for her shoots. Jeans, sneakers, and her trusty hoodie. But lately, she'd been wearing dresses, styling her hair, even putting on makeup. Why the change? I asked one morning as she slipped on a sundress. She paused, smoothing the fabric over her hips. Oh, I just felt like dressing up. Sometimes it helps me feel more creative. It sounded plausible enough, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. I decided to test her. Where are you headed today? Just downtown, she said quickly. There's this old bridge I want to photograph. Should be a good spot. Her answer felt rehearsed, like she'd been expecting the question. I nodded, trying to keep my tone light. Mind if I come with you? I could use a change of scenery. Her eyes widened, just for a split second, but it was enough. Oh, I don't think it's your kind of thing, she said, forcing a smile. I'll probably be crawling around under the bridge, getting dirty. You'd be bored. I let it go, but her reaction only fueled my suspicion. Later that afternoon, when she left the house, I decided to follow her. I'd never done anything like this before, and the thought of spying on my wife made my stomach churn. But I couldn't ignore the growing feeling that something was very, very wrong. I waited a few minutes after she drove off, then got into my car and followed at a distance. She headed downtown, just like she said she would, but instead of stopping at the bridge, she turned into the parking lot of a cafe. I parked a block away and watched as she got out of her car, her camera bag slung over her shoulder. She wasn't meeting a photography group or setting up a shot. She was meeting someone, a man. He was tall, with dark hair and a casual confidence that made my blood boil. They hugged when they saw each other, and the ease between them told me this wasn't their first meeting. I stayed in the car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Every instinct in me screamed to storm over there, to demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I pulled out my phone and took a photo of them together, proof of what I was seeing. Then I drove away, my heart pounding in my chest. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced with questions and accusations I wasn't ready to voice. Who was he? How long had this been going on? And how had I been so blind? When I got home, I paced the living room, replaying the image of Megan hugging that man over and over in my mind. The photo on my phone felt like a weight in my pocket, proof that my instincts hadn't been wrong. I thought about calling her, demanding an explanation, but I knew I wouldn't get the truth. Not yet. Megan was too good at deflecting, at spinning stories that sounded plausible enough to make me doubt myself. Instead, I decided to wait for her to come home. When she finally walked through the door a few hours later, she was all smiles. "Hey," she said, setting her camera bag on the counter. "You won't believe the shots I got today. The light under that bridge was perfect." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "Sounds like a productive day," I said evenly. "It was," she replied, heading to the fridge. "You should come with me next time. It's a cool spot." Her casual tone made my stomach churn. She was lying so effortlessly, like it was second nature. I studied her as she poured herself a glass of water, trying to read her expression. She looked happy, almost glowing, and for a moment, I hated her for it. "You seem different lately," I said, keeping my voice neutral. She glanced at me, her smile faltering just slightly. "Different? How?" "I don't know," I said, shrugging. "You've been out a lot more. Seem a little distracted." Megan laughed, brushing off my comment. "It's just work, Eric. You know how I get when I'm focused on a project." I nodded, pretending to accept her explanation, but inside, I was seething. She wasn't focused on a project. She was focused on him. That night, after she went to bed, I stayed up, scrolling through the photos on my phone. The one of her and the man at the cafe felt like a punch to the gut every time I looked at it. I didn't know who he was or what he meant to her, but I knew one thing for certain. Megan was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. By the next morning, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't sit idly by, hoping Megan would come clean on her own. If I wanted answers, I'd have to find them myself. She left early that day, saying she was meeting a client for a portrait session. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I went to work. I started with her camera bag. Megan guarded it like a dragon guarding treasure, but I'd never had a reason to go through it before. Now I wasn't so sure. Carefully, I unzipped the main compartment. Her camera, lenses, and memory cards were all neatly organized. It looked innocent enough, but as I sifted through the smaller pockets, I found something that made my stomach drop. A second phone. It was an older model, one I didn't recognize. The screen was cracked and the case was scuffed, but it still powered on. The lock screen required a passcode, and though I tried a few guesses, I couldn't get in. Why would Megan have a second phone? She never mentioned it, and there was no logical reason for her to need one, unless she was using it to hide something. I put the phone back in her bag, careful not to disturb anything else. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking as I moved to her laptop. I'd never invaded Megan's privacy like this before, but I felt justified. After all, she was the one keeping secrets. The laptop wasn't password protected, which surprised me. As I opened her email, I half expected to find nothing. Megan was smart. If she was hiding something, she'd likely be careful about where she left traces. But then I saw it. An email thread with a subject line that made my blood run cold. "Can't wait to see you again." I clicked on it, my stomach twisting as I read the messages. They were from someone named Ryan, and the tone was unmistakably intimate. They talked about meeting up, shared inside jokes, and hinted at memories they'd made together. The most recent email was from him, sent just 2 days ago. "Yesterday was amazing. You make me feel alive. Megan. Let's make plans for next week. I'll clear my schedule for you." I stared at the screen, the weight of the words pressing down on me. This wasn't just a passing flirtation. This was something deeper, something real. I closed the laptop and sat back, my mind racing. Who was Ryan? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? I couldn't focus on anything for the rest of the day. The name Ryan echoed in my mind, and the words from the emails replayed in an endless loop. Megan had been careful but not careful enough. She had left a trail, and now I had a name to follow. That evening, while Megan was in the shower, I opened her laptop again. My hands trembled as I searched her browser history, combing through every site she'd visited. Eventually, I found a link to a local gym's social media page. Clicking on it, I scrolled through the posts until I saw him. Ryan. He was a personal trainer at the gym, tall and athletic with an easy smile that radiated confidence. His posts were filled with motivational quotes and selfies with clients. Among them was a photo of him with Megan, her arm draped casually over his shoulder, both of them grinning at the camera. The caption read, "Best training session today. Can't wait for the next one. Hashtag Team Ryan." I stared at the screen, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Megan had mentioned joining a gym a few months ago, saying she wanted to get in shape and try something new. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Now, it was obvious what or who had inspired her sudden interest in fitness. I saved a screenshot of the photo, along with Ryan's profile information, before closing the laptop. When Megan came out of the shower, I pretended everything was normal, but inside I was seething. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as my thoughts spiraled. Megan had betrayed me, not just with her actions but with her lies. She'd woven a web of deception, and I had walked right into it, blind and trusting. I needed answers. I needed to know how far this had gone. The next morning, while Megan was out, I drove to the gym. My pulse pounded as I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the room for Ryan. He was there, standing by the weight rack, chatting with a group of women. They laughed at something he said, their faces lighting up with admiration. I felt a surge of anger but forced myself to stay calm. Approaching the reception desk, I asked for information about membership plans, pretending to be interested in joining. As the receptionist rattled off the details, I asked casually, "So, is Ryan pretty popular here? I've heard a lot about him." She smiled. "Oh yeah, Ryan's great. He's one of our most sought-after trainers. Always fully booked." "Yeah, I can see why," I said, glancing toward him. "He seems like he's got a lot of fans." The receptionist chuckled. "Yeah, people love him. He's really good at what he does. Megan Miller, she's one of his clients, always raves about him." Hearing her name felt like a punch to the gut. I nodded, forcing a smile before thanking the receptionist and leaving the gym. Back in my car, I gripped the steering wheel, my mind a whirlwind of rage and heartbreak. I had my answers, and now I had to decide what to do next. By the time I got home, the storm inside me had reached a breaking point. I wanted to confront Megan, to demand the truth, but I knew she'd deny it. She'd been lying to my face for weeks. What reason did I have to believe she'd suddenly confess? Instead, I decided to take control of the situation. If Megan wasn't going to come clean on her own, I'd force her hand. That evening, I waited for her to leave for one of her so-called shoots. As soon as her car disappeared down the street, I grabbed the second phone I'd found in her camera bag and drove to a nearby electronics store. It didn't take long for the staff to help me unlock it. They bypassed the passcode with ease, and when the home screen finally lit up, I felt a surge of both triumph and dread. The Messages app was full of exchanges with Ryan. Reading them felt like a knife twisting in my chest. "Ryan, can't stop thinking about you. Last night was perfect." Megan, "Me too. I feel like I'm on fire when I'm with you." Ryan, "You're incredible. Let's meet tomorrow. Same place." Megan, "Of course. I'll find a way." I scrolled through the texts, each one more damning than the last. They talked about stolen moments, shared fantasies, and plans for their next rendezvous. My blood boiled as I read Megan's words. Words that used to be reserved for me. Then I found it. A message from Ryan sent just hours earlier. "Ryan, still good for tonight? Can't wait to see you." Megan, "Definitely. Usual time and place." This was my chance. I put the phone back in her bag, exactly where I'd found it, and waited. When Megan came home a few hours later, She acted like everything was normal. She kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, and even suggested we watch a movie together. But all I could think about was what I'd seen. The next evening, I told her I'd be working late. She barely reacted, brushing it off with a casual, "Okay, have a good night." I watched as she grabbed her camera bag and left, my heart pounding as I followed her in my car. She drove downtown just like the texts had said. I kept my distance, staying a few cars behind as she navigated through the city. Finally, she turned into the parking lot of a small boutique hotel. I parked on the street and watched as she got out of her car, her camera bag slung over her shoulder. She wasn't there for a shoot. Minutes later, Ryan appeared, stepping out of his car and striding over to meet her. They didn't even try to hide it. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her like they were the only two people in the world. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, rage and betrayal coursing through me. But I didn't move. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of them together. They walked into the hotel, oblivious to the fact that I was watching. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was undeniable proof. And now I had everything I needed. I sat in my car outside the hotel for what felt like an eternity. Watching Megan walk into that building with Ryan felt like the final crack in the foundation of our marriage. The person I thought I knew, the life I thought we had, it was all a lie. As the minutes ticked by, my anger simmered into something colder. I couldn't let this go on any longer. It was time to confront her, to lay everything out and force her to face what she'd done. But not here. Not like this. I drove home, my mind racing with what I'd say. I didn't want to explode in rage. It would give her an excuse to deflect, to turn the blame on me. No, I needed to stay calm, to control the narrative. When Megan returned later that night, it was nearly midnight. She walked in quietly, her shoes in her hand, as if trying not to wake me. But I was waiting for her in the living room. She froze when she saw me sitting on the couch, the dim light of a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. "Eric," she said, startled. "You're up late." "I could say the same about you," I replied, my voice even. She hesitated, glancing at her bag, as if it held the answers she didn't want to give. "I had a late shoot. Lost track of time." I stood, pulling my phone from my pocket. "Cut the crap, Megan." Her eyes widened as I swiped to the photos I'd taken outside the hotel. I held the screen up for her to see, watching as the color drained from her face. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my effort to stay calm. "Explain this to me." She stared at the photos, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Eric, don't lie to me," I snapped, my anger breaking through. "I followed you, Megan. I saw you with him. I know you've been meeting him." Tears welled up in her eyes as she sank into the nearest chair. "Eric, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "Didn't mean for what to happen?" I demanded. "You didn't mean to betray me? To throw away everything we've built?" She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice muffled. "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You succeeded anyway." For a long moment, the only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. "Who is he?" I asked finally, my voice cold. "How long has this been going on?" "His name is Ryan," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I met him at the gym. It started a few months ago." "A few months," I repeated, the weight of her words sinking in. "You've been lying to me for months, Megan. Do you even understand what you've done?" "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said, looking up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "It was just, I don't know. I felt lost." "Lost?" I said, my voice rising. "So you found yourself by sneaking around behind my back? By sleeping with someone else?" She flinched at my words but didn't deny them. "I made a mistake," she said. "A terrible mistake. But it didn't mean anything. You're the one I love, Eric." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Don't insult me by saying that. Love doesn't look like this, Megan. Love doesn't destroy the person you're supposed to care about. Her sobs grew louder, but I felt nothing but anger and betrayal. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I said, turning toward the stairs. "I need time to think. Don't expect me to just forgive and forget." As I climbed the stairs to the guest room, her cries echoed behind me, but I didn't look back. This wasn't just about a mistake. This was the end of everything I thought I knew. The days that followed felt like living in a fog. Megan and I barely spoke, existing in the same house but inhabiting entirely different worlds. The tension was suffocating, the silence louder than any argument we could have had. I slept in the guest room, not because she asked me to, but because I couldn't bear to be near her. Every time I looked at her, I saw her walking into that hotel with Ryan. Her face lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. It was like she'd saved her best self for him, leaving me with the scraps. Megan tried to break through the wall I'd built around myself, but her attempts felt hollow. "Eric, can we talk?" she asked one evening, her voice tentative. I didn't look up from the TV. "What's there to talk about?" Her shoulders slumped, and she sat on the arm of the couch, close enough for me to feel her presence but not touch. I need you to know that I'm sorry. I know I've hurt you, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to make this right." I let out a bitter laugh, finally meeting her gaze. "Make it right? How, Megan? You can't undo what you've done. You can't erase those months of lies or the fact that you chose him over me." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't soften. "I didn't choose him," she said, her voice trembling. "I got lost, Eric. I let myself believe things that weren't true, that I wasn't good enough, that we weren't good enough. But I see now how wrong I was." Her words hit me like a hammer, but I couldn't tell if they were real or just another layer of manipulation. "And what about him?" I asked coldly. "Does he know you're here begging for a second chance? Or are you keeping your options open?" She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I ended it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I told him it was over, that I couldn't do this anymore." "Do you want a medal?" I snapped. "Congratulations, Megan. You ended it after you destroyed everything." She started to sob, her hands covering her face. Part of me wanted to comfort her, but the larger part couldn't forget what she'd done. I stood, unable to sit there any longer. "I need space," I said, walking toward the stairs. "Don't follow me." I heard her cry out my name as I closed the door to the guest room, but I didn't respond. For the first time since we'd gotten married, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Another week passed, and the weight of everything was crushing me. Megan tried to reach out again and again, but her apologies felt like salt in the wound. Every time she said she loved me, all I could think about was Ryan. One night, as I sat in the guest room scrolling through the photos I'd taken outside the hotel, my phone buzzed with a new text. It was from an unknown number. "Eric, this is Ryan. We need to talk." My blood ran cold. How had he gotten my number? What could he possibly have to say to me? Against my better judgment, I texted back. "What do you want?" The reply came almost instantly. "I'm not proud of what happened, but I think you deserve to hear the truth from me. Can we meet?" I stared at the message, my pulse racing. I didn't want to meet him, didn't want to hear whatever excuses he had lined up. But at the same time, the thought of confronting him, of finally getting answers, was too tempting to ignore. "Fine," I replied. "Tomorrow, noon, City Park." When the time came, I arrived early, sitting on a bench near the pond where kids fed ducks and joggers circled the trails. I didn't have to wait long. Ryan appeared, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans, his expression serious as he approached me. "Eric?" he asked, stopping a few feet away. I nodded, my jaw clenched. "Ryan." He sat down on the bench, keeping a careful distance. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice low. "I know that probably doesn't mean much to you, but I need to say it." I laughed bitterly. "You're right, it doesn't." He nodded as if expecting my response. "What happened between Megan and me, it wasn't supposed to happen. It started with her asking for help at the gym, and then we just clicked. I didn't plan it, Eric. I swear I didn't." "Clicked," I said, my voice rising. You clicked with my wife. And that's supposed to justify sneaking around behind my back. No, he said quickly. There's no excuse for what we did. I'm not here to defend it. I wanted to tell you that it's over. I told her we couldn't keep doing this. I stared at him, my fists clenched. Why now? Because you suddenly grew a conscience? Or because you realized you were playing with someone else's life? He looked down at his hands, shame etched on his face. Both. I didn't realize how much damage we were causing until she told me she was trying to fix things with you. I realized I was standing in the way of her marriage. Her marriage? I said, laughing bitterly. You mean the one you helped her destroy? He didn't respond, and for a moment I considered taking a swing at him. But I didn't. I stood instead, glaring down at him. You may think you're doing the right thing now, but that doesn't erase what you did, I said coldly. Stay away from her. Stay away from me. If I see you again, I won't just be talking. Ryan nodded, his expression grim. You won't have to worry about me, Eric. I'm done. I walked away without looking back, my heart pounding as the weight of the confrontation settled over me. When I got home, Megan was waiting in the living room, her face pale. Where were you? She asked. I stared at her, the anger and exhaustion bubbling to the surface. With Ryan, I said flatly. Her eyes widened and she took a step back. You talked to him? I did, I said. And now I'm done. Done with him. And done with you. Her breath hitched, and tears filled her eyes. Eric, please. No, I said firmly. You made your choice, Megan. Now I'm making mine. I walked past her, heading to the guest room to start packing my things. Packing my things wasn't as cathartic as I'd hoped. Every item I stuffed into my suitcase carried memories of the life Megan and I had built, the love I thought was unshakable, and the betrayal that shattered it all. Megan stood in the doorway of the guest room, her arms wrapped around herself as tears streamed down her face. Eric, please don't do this, she said, her voice breaking. I know I messed up, but I'm begging you. Don't leave. I didn't respond, didn't even look at her. Couldn't. If I did, I might start doubting myself, and I couldn't afford that. Eric, she said again, stepping closer. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. Just don't give up on us. I zipped my suitcase shut, the sound cutting through her pleas like a knife. Megan, I didn't give up on us, I said, finally meeting her gaze. You did. The moment you decided he was worth more than our marriage, you gave up. Her sobs grew louder, and she reached for me, but I stepped back. Don't, I said, my voice cold. You don't get to touch me, not after everything you've done. I grabbed my suitcase and walked past her, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. As I reached the front door, I turned to her one last time. You'll hear from my lawyer, I said. Don't call me, don't text me, and don't try to explain. It's too late for that. She collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands, as I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it felt better than the suffocating tension of the house I was leaving behind. I loaded my suitcase into the car and sat behind the wheel, staring at the darkened windows of the place that had once been my home. It didn't feel like home anymore. Driving away felt surreal, like I was leaving behind a version of myself I no longer recognized. The man who trusted blindly, who believed in forever, he didn't exist anymore. I checked into a hotel that night, the silence of the room both comforting and oppressive. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to cry, not out of weakness, but out of the overwhelming grief of losing the life I thought I had. In the days that followed, I began to pick up the pieces. I met with a lawyer to start the divorce proceedings, leaning on close friends who offered their support. Megan tried to reach out once, sending me a long email filled with apologies and promises to change. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Months later, as the divorce was finalized, I found myself standing in front of a new apartment, the keys in my hand. It wasn't much, a modest one-bedroom in the city, but it was mine. A fresh start. As I stepped inside, I felt a strange sense of hope. The scars of Megan's betrayal would take time to heal, but I knew I would get there. And when I did, I'd be stronger than ever. If you like our content, leave a like and subscribe for more videos.